Let me paint you a picture. My lake cabin, a cedar-scented slice of paradise nestled on the edge of Lake Serenity, was my escape from the corporate grind. I'm Alex, a 38-year-old data analyst with a penchant for fishing and a deep-seated hatred for bureaucracy. That cabin, 2 bedrooms, a creaky porch swing, and a view of the water that could make you forget your inbox, meant everything. I'd bought it 5 years ago, a fixer-upper I poured my weekends into, sanding floors until my hands blistered and painting walls a shade of blue that matched the lake at dusk. It wasn't just a house. It was my middle finger to the world's noise. The trouble started innocently enough, or so I thought. Lake Serenity's Homeowners Association, led by the insufferable Karen Vanderwhit, had been a thorn in my side since day one. Karen, with her bleach-blonde bob and a smile that screamed, "I'm calling the manager," was the self-appointed queen of the lakefront. She'd fine you for a mailbox that leaned half an inch too far left or grass that grew a blade too tall. Her clipboard was her scepter, and she wielded it like she was auditioning for a dictator biopic. Most of us just paid the fines to avoid her wrath. I mean, who has time to argue with someone who treats a cul-de-sac like it's her personal fiefdom? Last spring, I got a letter from the HOA, printed on that cheap, cream-colored paper Karen loved because it screamed official. It claimed my cabin's exterior paint was non-compliant with the HOA's color palette. Non-compliant? The nerve. My cabin was a soft blue, not some neon nightmare. I ignored it, assuming it was another of Karen's power trips. Big mistake. A week later, another letter arrived. This one with a $500 fine and a threat to escalate matters if I didn't repaint by June 1st. I rolled my eyes, tossed the letter in a drawer, and went back to fishing. The lake was calm, the bass were biting, and I figured Karen would move on to harassing someone else's petunias. Then came the third letter. This one wasn't just a fine, it was a legal notice. The HOA claimed they'd sold my cabin at auction for unpaid dues and violations. Sold. My cabin. I stared at the letter, the words blurring as my coffee mug trembled in my hand. They couldn't do that, right? I'd paid my dues, every cent, on time, auto-debited from my account. I checked my bank statements, and sure enough, the HOA had been cashing my checks like clockwork. This wasn't a mistake, this was a shakedown. I drove to the HOA office, a squat building with fake columns that screamed, "We spent your dues on tacky decor." Karen was there, perched behind a desk cluttered with inspirational mugs and a framed photo of her poodle, Sir Reginald. "Alex," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "you really should have responded to our notices." I held up my bank statements, pointing out the payments. She barely glanced at them, her manicured nails tapping the desk. "The board voted," she said, smirking. "Your property was sold to a lovely couple from the city. They're moving in next week." I felt my jaw clench so hard I thought my teeth might crack. "You can't sell my property," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've paid everything." Karen leaned forward, her eyes glinting like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Take it up with our lawyer," she said, sliding a business card across the desk. I didn't touch it. Instead, I leaned in, matching her stare. "This isn't over, Karen." Her smile didn't waver, but I saw a flicker of something. Nervousness, maybe? Good. Back home, I dug through my files, pulling every HOA receipt, email, and letter. My cabin wasn't just my sanctuary, it was my leverage. What Karen didn't know, what nobody in the HOA knew, was that my cabin had a secret. I'd bought it from a federal agent at a steep discount, part of an FBI sting operation. The deed had a hidden clause, buried in fine print, that tied the property to an ongoing investigation. Selling it without federal approval? That was a felony. I smirked, sipping my coffee as the lake sparkled outside. Karen had no idea she'd just stepped into a trap bigger than her ego. I called my friend Mike, a lawyer with a knack for finding loopholes and a personal vendetta against HOAs after his own run-in with one. "Alex," he said, laughing when I told him the story, "this is gold. They can't sell a federally protected property. Let's bury them." We spent hours drafting a response, citing property law and federal statutes. I also reached out to my contact at the FBI, Agent Torres, who'd sold me the cabin. He was a gruff guy, all business. But when I explained the situation, I heard a rare chuckle. They did what? He said. Oh, this is going to be fun. By the next morning, I had a plan. Step 1, play dumb. I sent Karen a polite email, asking for clarification on the sale and requesting the buyer's details. Step 2, gather evidence. I started recording every interaction, from Karen's smug voicemails to the HOA's shady meeting minutes, which I got from a neighbor who owed me a favor. Step 3, wait. The FBI was already moving, and I knew Karen's little empire was about to crumble. As I sat on my porch, the lake breeze cool against my skin, I couldn't help but grin. Karen thought she'd won, but she'd just started a war she couldn't finish. The next week was a masterclass in Karen's audacity. I woke up to the sound of a truck rumbling down my gravel driveway, its tires crunching like it was chewing the earth. Peering through my blinds, I saw a moving van parked crookedly, with two guys unloading furniture onto my lawn. A sleek black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a couple in their 50s, dressed like they'd just walked off a yacht. Matching linen outfits, sunglasses perched on their noses despite the overcast sky. The lovely couple Karen had mentioned, I presumed. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Rushing out there screaming would only give Karen the drama she craved. Instead, I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped onto the porch, letting the creaky swing add a touch of cinematic flair. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice polite but sharp enough to cut through their chatter. The couple froze, clearly not expecting me. The man, sporting a goatee that screamed midlife crisis, adjusted his sunglasses. "You must be the former owner," he said, like he was reading from Karen's script. "We bought this place fair and square." I smiled, tight-lipped, and pointed to my cabin. "Funny, because I'm still living here, and my deed says otherwise." The woman, clutching a designer purse like a shield, piped up. "The HOA assured us this was handled. We have paperwork." "Paperwork?" Oh, Karen had been busy. I asked to see it, keeping my tone neutral, but they refused, saying their lawyer would deal with me. Classic. I recorded their license plate as they drove off, the moving guys awkwardly piling their furniture back into the van. Step 1 of Karen's plan: intimidate me with new owners. Step 2, probably call the cops. I wasn't about to wait for her next move. I called Mike again, who was practically giddy. "They're moving people in already? That's bold, even for an HOA." He told me to file a formal complaint with the county, citing illegal property transfer, and to keep every scrap of communication. I spent the afternoon at the county clerk's office, where a bored clerk named Janet, with a voice like she'd smoked a pack a day since the 80s, confirmed my deed was still in my name. No sale had been recorded. Karen's auction was a sham, and I had the paper trail to prove it. Back home, I found a new notice taped to my door, the HOA's logo glaring like a cheap crown. It demanded I vacate by Friday, 3 days away, or face legal action and law enforcement involvement. The audacity was almost impressive. I snapped a photo, added it to my growing evidence folder, and emailed Agent Torres an update. His reply was short: "Sit tight. We're watching." I didn't know exactly what the FBI was planning, but the thought of Karen's smug face when they swooped in kept me warm at night. That evening, I decided to stir the pot. I posted on the neighborhood's private Facebook group, carefully worded to avoid tipping my hand. "Anyone else get weird HOA notices about property sales? Just curious." Within hours, the comments exploded. Neighbors I barely knew shared stories of Karen's overreach, fines for unapproved birdhouses, threats to tow cars parked an inch over the line. One guy, Tom, a retired mechanic with a beard like a Viking, messaged me privately. "Karen's been bragging about streamlining the neighborhood," he wrote. "Heard her at the last HOA meeting saying your cabin was prime real estate for her friends." Friends, huh? That explained the yacht couple. I invited Tom over for a beer on my porch. He showed up with a six-pack and a folder of his own, HOA meeting minutes he'd swiped from the office when Karen wasn't looking. The minutes were gold. They mentioned my cabin by lot number, with notes about a private sale to preferred buyers and a vague reference to clearing debts. No mention of an auction or unpaid dues. It was so blatantly corrupt, I almost laughed. Tom grinned, cracking open a beer. Karen's running this place like her personal casino, he said. You gonna take her down? I clinked my bottle against his. Oh, Tom, you have no idea. The next morning, Karen escalated. I was sipping coffee when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He was young, probably fresh out of training, with a nervous habit of adjusting his belt. Sir, we got a call about a squatter, he said, glancing at his notepad. A squatter? In my own damn house. I showed him my deed, my ID, and the county clerk's confirmation. He looked embarrassed, muttering something about misinformation before leaving. I caught Karen watching from her car across the street, her sunglasses reflecting the morning light like some budget supervillain. She sped off when she saw me staring. I wasn't just mad anymore. I was motivated. Karen thought she could bully me out of my home, but she'd picked the wrong fight. I spent the rest of the day digging deeper, calling every neighbor who'd commented on my post. Most were scared of Karen's wrath, but a few, like Tom, were fed up enough to help. We formed a small alliance, meeting at my cabin to strategize. My plan was simple. Keep Karen thinking she was winning while the FBI built their case. Agent Torres had hinted they were investigating the HOA for fraud, and my cabin sale was the tip of the iceberg. As I grilled burgers for the group, the smell of charcoal mixing with the lake air, I couldn't help but smirk. Karen's empire was about to get a federal-sized reality check. The air around Lake Serenity was starting to crackle with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm when you can smell the rain coming. Karen's stunt with the sheriff had lit a fire under me, and I wasn't the only one feeling the heat. My little alliance, Tom the Viking mechanic, Sarah the librarian with a knack for research, and Javier, a contractor who'd been fined for unapproved toolbox storage, met again at my cabin. We sat around my kitchen table, the wood scarred from years of coffee mugs and late-night card games, plotting like a ragtag crew of vigilantes. The goal? Keep Karen distracted while the FBI did their thing, and maybe, just maybe, give her enough rope to hang herself. I'd spent the morning combing through Tom's stolen HOA minutes. They were a treasure trove of arrogance. Karen and her bored cronies had been funneling fines into a private account labeled Community Improvement Fund. Improvement, my ass. The only thing improved was Karen's wardrobe, judging by the new diamond studs sparkling in her ears at the last HOA meeting. I cross-referenced the minutes with my bank records and found discrepancies. Payments I'd made that weren't logged, fines I'd never been notified about. It was sloppy, like Karen thought no one would dare check her math. Sarah, who could sniff out a lie faster than a bloodhound, dug into public records and found something juicy. The lovely couple from the moving van, the yacht wannabes, were Karen's cousins. Their names, Richard and Elaine Prescott, popped up on a shady LLC that had bought 3 other lakefront properties at auction over the past 2 years. All were sold for pennies on the dollar, and all were tied to HOA violations that smelled as fishy as the lake after a hot summer day. This isn't just Karen being a control freak, Sarah said, her glasses slipping down her nose as she waved a printout. It's a racket. Javier, who'd been quiet, leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. I've seen this before, he said. My uncle lost a rental property to an HOA scam in Florida. They forged documents, scare owners out, and flip the properties to their buddies. His dark eyes glinted with something dangerous. We need to catch her in the act. I nodded, passing around a plate of homemade nachos. The smell of melted cheese filled the room, grounding us as we planned our next move. Step 1 was to bait Karen. I sent her another email, playing the part of a frazzled homeowner. Dear Ms. Vanderwhit, I'm trying to resolve this amicably. Can we meet to discuss the sale? I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. I hit send, smirking at the thought of her reading it in her pristine home office, probably stroking Sir Reginald like a Bond villain. Sure enough, she replied within hours, her tone so condescending I could hear her nasal voice through the screen. Alex, the board's decision is final, but I'll grant you a meeting out of courtesy. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., HOA office. The meeting was a circus. Karen sat at the head of a conference table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One, A guy named Greg with a comb-over that defied gravity kept fidgeting with his pen. The other, Linda, a retired accountant, avoided eye contact like I was contagious. Karen, though, was in her element, her clipboard loaded with papers I was sure were as fake as her smile. "Alex," she began, "your failure to comply with HOA regulations left us no choice. The sale was legal, and the new owners have every right to move in." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and let a slow grin spread across my face. "Interesting," I said, pulling out my phone. "Because the county has no record of this sale, and my deed's still in my name." "Care to explain?" Greg's pen stopped clicking. Linda's face went pale. Karen's smile twitched, but she doubled down. "That's a clerical error," she snapped. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I stood, pocketing my phone, which had recorded every word. "Looking forward to it," I said, and walked out, feeling her glare burn a hole in my back. Outside, I called Agent Torres. "They're doubling down," I told him, the lake breeze cooling my face as I paced the parking lot. "Karen's pushing this fake sale hard." Torres's voice was calm, almost amused. "Good. We've got eyes on her accounts. Keep her talking." I didn't ask what eyes meant, but the thought of Karen's world unraveling made me want to crack open a beer and celebrate early. Back at the cabin, I rallied the troops. Sarah suggested we leak some of our findings to the neighborhood, just enough to stir panic without blowing the FBI's case. We drafted an anonymous post for the Facebook group, titled, "HOA Selling Homes Behind Owners' Backs." It listed vague but damning details. Unrecorded sales, mysterious LLCs, and Karen's name front and center. By midnight, the post had 47 comments, most of them furious. Neighbors started sharing their own stories, finds they couldn't explain, threats to their properties. Karen responded with a pinned comment, calling it defamatory nonsense and threatening legal action. Her desperation was palpable, like the smell of rain-soaked asphalt after a storm. The next morning, I woke to a new surprise, a tow truck in my driveway, hooking up my old Jeep. I sprinted outside, barefoot, the gravel biting my feet. The driver, a guy with a mullet and a bored expression, shrugged. "HOA orders. Says you're not a resident anymore." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, and showed him my driver's license with the cabin's address. He unhooked the Jeep, muttering an apology, but not before I snapped photos of the truck and its logo. Karen was getting sloppy, and I was ready to pounce. That night, Tom, Sarah, Javier, and I huddled over my laptop, the glow casting shadows on the cabin's cedar walls. We had Karen's playbook, fake finds, forged sales, and a network of cronies profiting off our homes. But we needed more than documents. We needed her to slip up in public, where everyone could see. As the lake lapped against the shore outside, I grinned, the kind of grin you get when you know you're about to outsmart someone who thinks they're untouchable. Karen's reign was on borrowed time, and I was ready to collect. The sun was barely up when I heard the unmistakable screech of Karen's voice outside my cabin. It was like a seagull had learned to curse. I peeked through the blinds and saw her standing on my lawn, clipboard in hand, directing a landscaper to rip out my flower beds. My flower beds. I'd spent months planting those marigolds, their golden petals a tribute to my mom, who'd loved gardening. Karen's petty vengeance was hitting new lows, and the sight of her smug face as she pointed at my plants made my fists clench so hard my knuckles cracked. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped outside, the morning dew cold under my bare feet. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through her bravado. She spun around, her bob swinging like a pendulum. "This property is no longer yours," she snapped, waving a document that looked like it was printed on her cousin's bargain bin printer. "We're preparing it for the new owners." The landscaper, a wiry guy with a sunburned neck, hesitated, his shovel hovering over my marigolds. I gave him a look that said, "You really want to be part of this?" He backed off, muttering about needing to check his work order. I held up my phone, making sure Karen saw the red recording dot. "You're trespassing," I said, stepping closer, "and destroying my property. Care to explain that to the sheriff?" Her eyes flickered, Fear, maybe, or just rage, but she doubled down. "You're the one who'll be explaining," she hissed and stormed off, her heels sinking into the grass. I sent the video to Mike, who texted back, "She's digging her own grave. Keep it up." The landscaper, now abandoned, apologized and left, leaving my marigolds miraculously intact. Score 1 for me. The Facebook post had turned the neighborhood into a powder keg. Comments were pouring in, with neighbors sharing stories of Karen's tyranny. A $200 fine for a noisy wind chime. A threat to seize a shed for being too rustic. One woman, Ellen, posted about her garage being repossessed for unpaid fines she'd never received. The group was buzzing, and Karen's pinned rebuttals were getting sloppier, full of typos and vague threats. She was cracking, and I could smell the panic like burnt toast. I called a meeting with my crew, Tom, Sarah, and Javier, at Sarah's house, a cozy bungalow with a front yard full of wildflowers Karen had probably fined her for. Over coffee and her homemade blueberry muffins, we planned our next move. Sarah had dug up more dirt. The LLC tied to Karen's cousins was linked to a shady real estate firm in the city, one with a history of flipping foreclosed properties. "They're not just selling homes," Sarah said, her voice low. "They're targeting lakefront lots for luxury condos. Your cabin's in their way, Alex." The thought of my sanctuary bulldozed for some glass-and steel monstrosity made my stomach churn. Javier suggested we go public, leak our evidence to a local reporter. Tom, ever the pragmatist, wanted to confront Karen at the next HOA meeting, scheduled for Friday. I liked both ideas, but wanted to keep the FBI's involvement under wraps. Agent Torres had texted me that morning. "We're close. Get her to act out in public." A public meltdown? That was Karen's brand, and I knew just how to push her buttons. I drafted another email, this one dripping with fake deference. "Dear Ms. Vanderwhit, I'm devastated by the misunderstanding about my cabin. I'd like to present my case at the HOA meeting. Surely we can resolve this like neighbors." Her reply was almost instant. "You may speak, but the board's decision stands." Perfect. She thought she was luring me into her arena, but I was setting a trap. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs that squeaked like they were auditioning for a horror movie. Karen presided like she was judge, jury, and executioner, her clipboard now a tablet she tapped with manicured nails. The room was packed. Word of the Facebook post had spread, and neighbors were out for blood. I sat in the back, flanked by Tom and Sarah, my evidence folder tucked under my arm. Javier was outside, ready to record if things got heated. Karen opened with her usual spiel about community standards, but the crowd wasn't having it. Ellen stood up, waving a fine notice. "Why was my garage sold without my consent?" she demanded. Others chimed in, their voices overlapping in a chorus of frustration. Karen's smile tightened, and she tried to deflect, blaming clerical errors. That's when I stood, holding up my deed. "No error here," I said, loud enough for the room to hush. "You tried to sell my cabin, Karen, but the county says it's still mine. Care to explain your fake auction?" The room erupted. Karen banged her gavel, shouting for order, but it was like trying to herd cats in a rainstorm. Greg, the comb-over guy, looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Linda muttered something about needing to check the books. I slid my evidence folder onto the table, copies of the minutes, my bank statements, the LLC records Sarah found. "This is fraud," I said, staring Karen down. Her face went red, then white, then red again, like a malfunctioning traffic light. "You're out of order," she screeched, but the crowd was on my side, chanting for answers. She stormed out, claiming a family emergency, but I saw her make a call as she fled to her car. I texted Torres. "She's spooked. Called someone." His reply was instant. "Cops are coming. Stay calm." "Cops? Again?" I grinned, leaning back in my chair as the room buzzed around me. Karen thought she could scare me with another deputy, but she didn't know the FBI was waiting in the wings. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, the smell of stale coffee and cheap air freshener filling the air, I felt the tide turning. Karen's empire was crumbling, and I was ready to watch it burn. The aftermath of the HOA meeting felt like the quiet before a lightning strike. The community center was still buzzing with neighbors swapping stories of Karen's tyranny, their voices a mix of outrage and excitement, like kids who'd just seen the school bully get detention. I stood outside, the cool night air carrying the scent of pine and lake water, my phone buzzing with texts from Tom, Sarah, and Javier. "She's losing it," Javier wrote, attaching a blurry video of Karen peeling out of the parking lot, her SUV's tires squealing like a banshee. I smirked, but my gut told me she wasn't done yet. Karen didn't strike me as the type to slink away quietly. She was more like a cornered raccoon, all teeth and bad decisions. Sure enough, at 7 a.m. the next morning, I was jolted awake by the wail of sirens. 2 sheriff's cars pulled up to my cabin, their lights painting my cedar walls red and blue. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my phone, and stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking under my weight. The same nervous deputy from before was back, this time with an older officer who looked like he'd rather be fishing. "Mr. Reed," the older one said, his voice gravelly, "we've got a report of trespassing and property damage." "Trespassing? In my own damn house." I bit back a laugh, picturing Karen's smug face as she dialed 911, thinking she'd finally checkmated me. I showed them my deed, the county records, and the video of Karen trying to rip out my flower beds. The younger deputy shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting his life choices, while the older one skimmed the documents with a frown. "This doesn't add up," he muttered, handing them back. "We'll need to speak with the complainant." Translation: Karen was about to get a reality check. As they drove off, I caught a glimpse of her SUV parked a block away, her silhouette hunched over the steering wheel. Was she watching? Plotting? Either way, her desperation was starting to smell like the burnt coffee grounds I'd tossed in the trash that morning. I called Agent Torres, my heart pounding as I paced the porch, the lake glinting in the morning sun. "She called the cops again," I said. "What's the play?" Torres's voice was calm, like he was ordering a sandwich instead of dismantling a fraud ring. "We're moving in today," he said. "Her call to the sheriff just gave us probable cause. Stay at the cabin and keep your phone on." My pulse spiked. The FBI was coming? Today? I felt like I'd just been handed the winning lottery ticket, but I kept my cool, replying, "Got it. I'll be here." An hour later, a black sedan rolled up, its tinted windows giving nothing away. Agent Torres stepped out, a stocky guy in a plain suit, his sunglasses reflecting the lake like twin mirrors. Behind him was another agent, a woman with a sharp jawline and a no-nonsense vibe, carrying a briefcase that probably held more secrets than my entire life. "Alex," Torres said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crush walnuts. "You've been busy." I grinned, gesturing to the cabin. "Just defending my castle." They set up in my living room, the smell of cedar and old books mixing with the faint leather scent of their gear. The woman, Agent Chun, spread out documents on my coffee table, her movements precise. "Your HOA's been laundering money through fake property sales," she said, not looking up. "Your cabin sale was their sloppiest job yet." She slid over a stack of papers, bank transfers, forged deeds, emails between Karen and her cousins. My name was all over them, along with phrases like expedite transfer and bypass county. It was like reading the script of a crime drama, except I was the star. Torres leaned back on my couch, sipping the coffee I'd offered. "The cabin's tied to an undercover op," he said. "We let you buy it cheap to keep it in play. Selling it without our approval? That's a federal offense." I nodded, trying to hide my glee. Karen hadn't just stepped on a landmine. She'd tap-danced on it. Chin added, "We're raiding the HOA office today." Karen's call to the sheriff gave us an excuse to move faster. "You in?" Was I in? Hell, I'd have sold my left kidney to see Karen's face when the feds rolled up. I agreed to play my part, keep Karen distracted while they executed the raid. My job was to show up at the HOA office with another appeal, armed with my evidence folder and enough sarcasm to make her squirm. I spent the morning prepping, printing extra copies of the forged sale documents, and slipping a tiny recorder into my pocket. Tom, Sarah, and Javier were on standby, ready to spread the word if things went south. By noon, I was at the HOA office, the fake columns gleaming under the sun like a budget Parthenon. Karen was there, looking frazzled, her lipstick smudged like she'd applied it in a moving car. "Alex," she said, her voice tight, "this is getting ridiculous. You're harassing the board." I leaned against the desk, letting a slow grin spread. "Harassing? Karen, you tried to sell my home to your cousins. I'm just here for answers." I slid my evidence folder across the desk, watching her eyes widen as she flipped through it. "This is slander," she stammered, but her hands were shaking. "Gotcha." Before she could recover, the door swung open, and Torres and Chin walked in, badges flashing. The room went silent, the air thick with the scent of Karen's floral perfume and her rising panic. "Karen Vanderwhit," Torres said, his voice flat but commanding. "We have a warrant to search these premises." Her face went the color of the HOA's tacky letterhead, and I swear I heard her clipboard hit the floor. I leaned back, crossing my arms, and gave her a look that said, "Checkmate." The feds moved in, seizing files and computers, while Karen sputtered about her rights. The irony was delicious, like a perfectly grilled steak after a long day. As I stepped outside, the lake breeze cooling my face, I heard sirens in the distance. Neighbors were gathering, phones out, filming the chaos. Karen's empire was imploding, and I had a front row seat. But something told me she wasn't done fighting, not yet. She was too stubborn, too entitled, to go down without a final, desperate swing. The scene at the HOA office was pure chaos, like a reality show finale where everyone's screaming and nobody's winning. Agent Torres and Chun were methodically boxing up files, their faces unreadable, while Karen stood in the corner, her arms crossed so tightly I thought her blazer might rip. Her voice, usually a weapon of smug authority, was now a high-pitched wail. "This is outrageous," she shrieked, waving her phone like it could summon a lawyer out of thin air. "You can't just barge in here." Torres didn't even look up, just handed her the warrant with a bored flick of his wrist. I leaned against the wall, sipping a soda I'd grabbed from the office fridge, letting the fizz burn my throat as I savored her meltdown. Outside, the neighborhood was turning into a circus. Word of the FBI raid had spread faster than gossip at a church picnic, and a crowd of neighbors gathered, their phones glinting in the afternoon sun like a swarm of fireflies. Tom was there, his Viking beard practically vibrating with glee, live streaming the whole thing to the Facebook group. Sarah was handing out copies of our evidence, those damning HOA minutes and LLC records, to anyone who'd take one. Javier, ever the strategist, was quietly talking to a local reporter who'd shown up, her notepad already half filled with quotes from angry residents. The air smelled of hot asphalt and righteous fury, and I couldn't help but grin. Karen's kingdom was falling, and we were the ones swinging the wrecking ball. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She stormed out of the office, her heels clicking like a countdown timer, and made a beeline for the crowd. "This is a witch hunt," she declared, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "Alex Reed is a liar, and these so-called agents are harassing an innocent board." The audacity was almost admirable, like watching a sinking ship's captain demand a promotion. A few neighbors booed, and Ellen, the garage sale victim, shouted, "What about my property, Karen?" The crowd surged forward, their voices a wave of pent-up frustration. Karen's face twitched, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's, but she held her ground, clutching her tablet like a shield. That's when her cousins, Richard and Elaine, pulled up in their black SUV, their linen outfits now rumpled and out of place. Richard stepped out, his goatee quivering as he tried to play the hero. "Everyone, calm down," he bellowed, as if he had any authority. The HOA acted legally. Big mistake. Sarah, with her librarian's precision, held up a printout of their LLC's shady transactions. "Legally," she said, loud enough for the reporter to hear. "Then explain why your company's been buying lakefront homes at 10 cents on the dollar." The crowd roared, and I saw Richard's bravado deflate like a punctured beach ball. I decided it was time to twist the knife. I stepped forward, my voice calm but carrying the weight of every sleepless night Karen had caused. "You sold my cabin to your cousins, Karen. I said, holding up my deed for the crowd to see. Except it's not yours to sell. It's under federal protection, and you just committed a felony. The crowd gasped, phones zooming in on me like I was delivering the sermon of the century. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, her lipstick smudged into a thin, trembling line. For the first time, she had nothing to say. But she wasn't out of tricks. As Torres and Chun escorted her back inside, she made a call, whispering furiously into her phone. I caught snippets, "Get here now, and fix this," and texted Torres a heads up. He nodded subtly, his eyes scanning the crowd. Minutes later, a sleek Mercedes rolled up, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back like he'd just walked off a mob movie set. Karen's lawyer, I assumed. He marched into the office, demanding to see the warrant, but Chin shut him down with a single raised eyebrow and a stack of legal documents. The guy's confidence wilted faster than my marigolds would have under Karen's shovel. Back outside, the reporter was now interviewing neighbors, her camera crew capturing the chaos. I slipped away to check in with my crew. Tom was still live streaming, his gravelly voice narrating like a sports commentator. And there goes Karen's lawyer, looking like he just realized he's on the wrong side of the feds. Sarah handed me a coffee, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "The reporter's running a story tonight," she said. "Local news, prime time. Karen's done." Javier clapped my shoulder. "You played her like a fiddle, man." But I wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Torres pulled me aside, his voice low. "Karen's trying to pin this on her board members," he said. "Claims she was just following orders. We've got enough to charge her, but she's slippery." He handed me a flash drive. "Keep this safe. It's a backup of her financials. If she tries to run, we'll need it." I pocketed it, the weight of it heavy against my chest. Karen was cornered, but cornered animals bite hardest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lake in shades of gold and shadow, I stood on my porch, the creak of the swing grounding me. The crowd had thinned, but the energy lingered, like the hum of cicadas after a long day. Karen was still in the HOA office, probably spinning lies to her lawyer, but the feds had her number. My phone buzzed with a notification. The Facebook group was exploding, with neighbors planning a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. I smiled, the taste of victory sharp and sweet, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen had one last card to play, and I was ready to call her bluff. The night after the FBI raid, my cabin felt like the eye of a hurricane. Calm, but only because the storm was circling. I sat on my porch, the lake surface a mirror of stars, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. My phone was blowing up with notifications from the neighborhood Facebook group, where neighbors were now openly calling for Karen's head on a metaphorical pike. The local news had run the story, complete with grainy footage of the feds hauling boxes from the HOA office and a soundbite from Sarah, coolly explaining the LLC scam like she was teaching a class. Karen's name was Mud, but I knew better than to think she'd go quietly. People like her don't fold. They double down, usually in the most unhinged way possible. Sure enough, the next morning brought a new surprise. I woke to the sound of hammering, loud enough to rattle my coffee mug. Outside, a crew was erecting a for sale sign on my lawn, the kind with gaudy red letters that screamed desperation. Taped to my door was a new notice, this one claiming eminent domain. Yes, eminent domain. As if the HOA was suddenly the government. The sheer absurdity made me laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed across the lake. Karen was flailing, throwing every legal term she'd Googled at the wall to see what stuck. I snapped a photo, sent it to Agent Torres, and called Mike. "She's lost it," Mike said, chuckling. "Eminent domain? For a lake cabin? That's a new one." I decided to confront her, but not at the HOA office. That was her turf. Instead, I tracked her down at the community center, where she was holding an emergency board meeting to address recent misinformation. The room was half empty, a far cry from the packed house of the last meeting. Greg, the comb-over guy, was there, looking like he'd aged a decade in a week. Linda, the accountant, was conspicuously absent. Karen stood at the front, her tablet now replaced by a stack of papers she clutched like a lifeline. Her bob was slightly askew. and her eyes had the wild glint of someone who'd had one too many espressos. "Alex," she snapped as I walked in, "this is a private meeting." I held up the eminent domain notice, letting it dangle like a bad report card. "Private? Like the fake auction you held for my cabin?" The room murmured, the few board members shifting uncomfortably. I tossed the notice onto the table, along with copies of the LLC records and forged sale documents. "You're done, Karen. The feds have your financials, and the neighborhood's ready to dissolve this scam you call an HOA." Her face went the color of spoiled milk, but she tried to rally, slamming her hand on the table. "You're slandering me," she shrieked. "I'll sue you for everything you've got." That's when the door swung open, and Agent Torres walked in, flanked by Chun and two other agents I didn't recognize. The room froze, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee and Karen's floral perfume, now tinged with sweat. "Karen Vanderwhit," Torres said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and unauthorized transfer of federally protected property." He held up a pair of handcuffs, the metal glinting under the fluorescent lights. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For once, she was speechless. The crowd outside had grown again, drawn by the sirens and the rumor of Karen's arrest. Tom was live streaming, his gravelly voice narrating like he was calling a boxing match. "And there's the knockout," he bellowed as Karen was let out in cuffs, her head bowed, her bob now a mess of flyaways. Richard and Elaine were there too, their SUV surrounded by neighbors chanting, "Shame! Shame!" The reporter from the night before was back, her camera crew capturing every second. I caught Sarah's eye across the crowd, and she gave me a thumbs up, her glasses glinting in the sunlight. But Karen had one last trick. As she was being loaded into a federal van, she twisted to face me, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "My lawyer will bury you, and I'll be back running this place before you can repaint your ugly cabin." I leaned in, just close enough for her to hear, and whispered, "Good luck with that, Karen. The FBI's got your laptop, your bank accounts, and about 10 witnesses ready to testify." Her face crumpled, and for a split second, I saw something human. Fear, maybe regret, before the van door slammed shut. Back at the cabin, I met with Torres and Chun. They confirmed what I'd suspected. Karen's operation was part of a larger real estate scam, with her cousins and their LLC at the center. My cabin's federal status had been the wrench in their gears, exposing the whole thing. "You did good, Alex," Chun said, packing up her briefcase. "We'll need you to testify, but this case is airtight." I nodded, the weight of the flash drive in my pocket a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. As the feds left, I stood on my porch, the lake breeze carrying the scent of freedom. The for sale sign was gone. Javier had yanked it out and tossed it into his truck with a grin. Neighbors were already planning a vote to dissolve the HOA, and the Facebook group was flooded with memes of Karen in cuffs. I cracked open a beer, the cold glass sweating in my hand, and toasted to the lake. Karen's reign was over, but I had a feeling the neighborhood was about to get a lot more interesting. With Karen in cuffs and her empire reduced to a pile of seized documents, Lake Serenity felt like it had taken its first deep breath in years. I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds, not sirens, and the lake sparkled like it was in on the victory. My cabin's cedar walls smelled of home, not fear, and the creak of my porch swing was a reminder that I'd fought for this place and won. But victory, I was learning, came with loose ends, and the neighborhood was buzzing with the kind of energy that follows a revolution. Part relief, part chaos, and a whole lot of gossip. The Facebook group had turned into a digital town square, with neighbors posting everything from celebratory memes to plans for a new HOA, one that didn't act like a mafia with better letterhead. Sarah was leading the charge, drafting a petition to dissolve the old board and replace it with elected volunteers. Tom was already designing Karen-free zone t-shirts, his Viking beard twitching with every cackle as he shared mock-ups online. Javier, ever practical, was organizing a cleanup crew to fix the damage Karen's landscapers had caused, starting with my poor marigolds, which were now looking more like survivors of a lawnmower massacre. I spent the morning at the county courthouse, meeting with Mike to file a formal claim against the HOA for attempted fraud. The clerk, Janet, was there, her smoker's rasp unchanged but her eyes glinting with amusement as I handed over my evidence folder. "Heard about your little showdown," she said, stamping my paperwork with a flourish. "Whole town's talking about it." I grinned, imagining Karen's name becoming local legend, like a cautionary tale told over campfires. Mike, sipping a vending machine coffee that smelled like regret, assured me the case was a slam dunk. "They'll settle," he said. "Nobody wants to face a federal lawsuit over a lake cabin." By afternoon, I was back at the cabin, hosting an impromptu barbecue for my crew. The smell of grilling burgers mixed with the lake's briny breeze, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Sarah brought her famous potato salad, Javier supplied a cooler of beer, and Tom showed up with a boombox blasting classic rock, his idea of a victory soundtrack. Neighbors drifted in, drawn by the music and the promise of free food. Ellen, the garage sale victim, hugged me so hard I nearly dropped my spatula. "You took her down for all of us," she said, her voice thick. I shrugged, flipping a burger. Just didn't want to lose my view. The local news ran a follow-up story that evening, and we watched it on my laptop, crowded around the porch table. The reporter detailed Karen's charges: wire fraud, money laundering, and a laundry list of federal violations tied to the cabin's protected status. Her cousins, Richard and Elaine, were also indicted, their shady LLC exposed as a front for flipping properties across the state. The camera panned to the HOA office, now sealed with yellow tape, and I couldn't help but smirk at the sight of Karen's tacky columns looking sad and abandoned. But the real twist came later that night. Agent Torres called, his voice gruff but tinged with satisfaction. "Karen's talking," he said, trying to cut a deal by throwing her board under the bus. Apparently, Greg and Linda had been in on the scam, skimming dues to fund their own lakefront dreams. Linda had fled town, leaving a trail of incriminating emails, while Greg was singing like a canary to avoid jail time. "And get this," Torres added, "Karen tried to bribe a deputy to lose your paperwork. We've got her on tape." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my beer. Karen, the queen of clipboards, undone by her own hubris. The next week was a blur of meetings, county hearings, neighborhood votes, and endless cups of coffee as we rebuilt what Karen had broken. The HOA was officially dissolved, replaced by a community council led by Sarah, who promised transparency and zero fines for unapproved birdhouses. I donated my evidence folder to the cause, ensuring every neighbor knew exactly how Karen's racket worked. The flash drive Torres gave me, safely locked in my safe, a reminder that sometimes the little guy wins by playing smarter, not louder. As the sun set on Lake Serenity, I stood on my porch, the lake's ripples catching the last light like a promise. My cabin was mine, my marigolds were replanted, and the neighborhood was free. Karen's downfall wasn't just justice. It was a warning to every entitled clipboard warrior out there. I raised a glass to the stars, the cool glass sweating in my hand, and toasted to new beginnings. Somewhere, in a federal holding cell, I hoped Karen was clutching her designer purse, realizing she'd finally met her match. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.